You can go ahead and type your Q&A, your questions into chat. I'm going to be monitoring that throughout the program. Unless it's a burning question, we'll likely save those questions till the end. We're saving a little time at the end where you can ask all of your questions. I'll help facilitate a little Q&A with Liz at the end, but go ahead and type your questions in if you like. And so here is my lovely counterpart, Ed Flash with Newcastle Arts Council. Ed, I'd love to introduce you to tell us a little bit about yourself, about Newcastle Arts Council, and to introduce Liz. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vicki. And welcome everybody, good morning. This is a perfect day to do something out indoors as I'm looking outside and there's a little drizzle in the area. As Vicki mentioned, I'm co-president of the Newcastle Arts Council, and I also sit on the Community Activities Commission for the City of Newcastle. And as Vicki mentioned, I'd like to also make sure we thank the City of Newcastle again for culture, as well as the King County Library System and the Newcastle Library for hosting the event today. And as Vicki mentioned, we have a great partnership in providing arts programming in the Newcastle area in conjunction with the library. The Newcastle Arts Council is a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is making the arts come alive in Newcastle. We provide programming and activities throughout the year, all related to various aspects of art and art awareness. If you are interested in learning more about the organization, you can visit our website at newcastlewaarts.org. Or send us an email at newcastlewaarts@gmail.com, and we can add you to the mailing list so you're periodically notified of events that happen throughout the year, like this great event today. Now it gives me the distinct honor of introducing Liz Gasper. We became associated with Liz as we started to put on art shows in the Newcastle area several years ago, and Liz was one of our exhibitors in the show, and she's done that for 2 years in a row. She's an acclaimed artist. She's been featured in Art Week magazine. Liz is also a teacher. She teaches classes in paper making, fiber arts, ceramic, glass fusion, and a lot of that's done in local arts festivals and the schools in the area. Liz has been very active in her career as an administrator as well, and in promoting arts in our community. She is the founder of the Kent Kids Arts Day, which is an interactive arts festival for families, where they can meet professional artists and interact with them on various art projects. She's also been involved in organizing art shows and exhibits, multiple ones around the countries, and with artists from both the US and internationally. Liz was also very active in the Kent area, where she served as the visual arts specialist for the city of Kent. She was also executive director of the Ketchikan Area Art and Humanities Council, and served as an arts management fellow in Washington, DC, at the National Endowment of the Arts. And we are so honored to have Liz as part of our community and have her be able to present something that she's very passionate about today, and something that she uses very regularly in her art creations. So with that, Liz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Vicki, and thank you, King County Libraries and King County Arts Commission. It's just really wonderful to be with all of you today. Let's see, so welcome, creative friends. It's just so great to get together and do a creative project on a beautiful Saturday. And I think you're really gonna love recycled paper making, because the supplies arrive every day in the mail. And it's just, it's a very fun thing to do. It's something that really stimulates your brain. I always say that ideas are like fireworks in your brain. And once you start making paper, it's like popcorn. You'll see scrap paper and you'll think, wow, I really want to grind that up and see what happens. So with every time, it's an experiment, and you get great results. And if you don't like whatever it is that you've just made, you can just put it back in the blender and try it again. So my plan today is I'm going to go through, I had a supply list up there. Don't worry if you have the supplies, don't have the supplies. It's all good. So what I'm going to do is go through the supply list that I gave you and show you what each piece is used for, and then we're going to make paper several times. So if you feel like you want to make it along with me, that will work out. And if you want to just watch it, by the end you'll see how it's done, and we'll be able to do it yourself. So our first first piece of equipment is a blender, just a regular old blender. This is a blender I got years ago at Goodwill. I've used it for festivals and events for 25 years, so they last forever. I like to use beat up old blenders. They still work, and you can just use them again and again. So just any old plain blender. And you can also try it with a food processor if you want to. To make paper, you need 3 things, and that is fibers. And so here's some of our fibers. This is some great junk mail and wrapping paper, tissue paper, envelopes, packaging from products, all kinds of things. Anything with that's the fibers that we're going to use. Recycled paper. This is how they do it in the recycled paper making factories too. They use used fibers from old paper, and they grind it up, and then they add water, and then apply pressure. So water, fiber, and pressure is how we make paper, both in the big factories with all the equipment they've got, and then at home. So let's see. So we've got the blender, the water, the fibers, and then to drain the water out, we'll need screens. So here's some screen. This is just window screen. You can buy paper making screens, but there's really no need. This is window screen that I got at a local hardware store. You can use, anything that will keep the fibers protected and allow the water to drain out. Makes a great screen for paper making. You could repurpose an old window screen. Say you have a screen door that's broken, well, the screen is still good. So along on my supply list, I said use a plastic shoebox, like a Sterilite container or a yogurt container or an ice cream container. So this is what this is. This is going to hold the water. And I drilled holes in the top. And you can do that either with your, electric drill. Okay. Actually, it's going to work better this way. There we go. Or if you're careful, you can use, say, a pointy knife, and this is for parents, and just twirl it around and around until you get some holes in there, put some holes through. You want to have a protected surface underneath so that you don't stab your table. Oh, be safe with these. So here's one giant salad container that I drilled holes in. Here's an ice cream container, that would work. A yogurt container would work. Something like this that held deli things, drill holes in that would work for our paper making process. All of these containers have kind of a lip around the edge. And you'll see that that's useful because the water will stay inside that area, and the water will drain through into the container, and it won't spill out over your table. Here's a container that I wouldn't use. It would collect water, but there's no lip around the edge. So the water would just kind of pour off around and onto your table, and that would create a mess. So one I wouldn't use, but pretty much anything is going to work. It's going to work. Just like every part of this process, it's experimenting and having fun with it. So then, so we've got our water container. We have screens. We'll need 2 screens. And then we need some shapes. So the shapes I use are cookie cutters. Those are always handy. I like to use plastic ones because the metal ones will kind of rust after time, but you can use anything. Another way to get a shape, if you don't have cookie cutters around, is to, just take a a plastic bottle. This is an orange juice container, but it could be a water bottle. It could be a soda bottle. I'm just cutting a ring off of that. All right, so here's a shape. Just got it off my orange juice container. That can be used. Here's one I did out of a water bottle. And there's the cookie cutters. So we'll be using a lot of different shapes as we make paper today. Okay. Then you'll need a sponge. And this is just a regular sponge. There's another one. These I asked on my supply list, don't use the kind with the scrubby parts, mostly because they have detergent in them, and that will affect the color of your paper. So if this is all you have, it's best if there's no more soap left in it, so you can take an old one and you can still use this sponge, just don't use the scrubby part. And then let's see, my last supply on here is, or second to last, is sheets, squares of fabric, any scrap fabric, as long as it's cotton and just has some absorption. That will help us with the whole paper making process. And then last but not least, I took plastic garbage bags and covered my work surface back here. Now the great news is I'll be able to use those garbage bags again later as garbage bags, but they will protect my my table surface and my counter surface from water. This is not like paint, so it's really not going to stain. But some of the fibers that you get out of your scrap papers are really bright. These Astro Bright papers, I will say especially the pink is super bright. So I wouldn't want to be making sheets of pink paper on a white countertop. You might get a little staining there. So, but the garbage bag, that will solve the whole deal. So let's start out here. I'm going to do this several times, so don't worry about being able to keep up with this. We'll make several sheets of paper, and by the end you'll have the idea of it. And so I'm going to start with my container. It's got the lid on. It's snug. I'm going to move my camera down a little. I'm going to put down my screen, and then I'm going to put down a shape. I think I'll start with a heart. Just going to set the heart down on the screen there. Okay. So that's ready. Now we're going to make some pulp. And here we have our blender. In the paper making industry, they call the big giant blenders they use in the industry, they call them Hollanders. So this is our little mini Hollander, and we're going to use it to grind up some of this wonderful junk. So here's some gift wrap. Love gift wrap. Look, it's got gold in it. Who knows what's going to happen with that? Lots of fun. This has some tape on it. Just going to tear that off and throw it away. And then I'm going to tear my gift wrap into chunks like about this. Put it in my blender. And then I'm going to add, let's see. I think we'll just take this envelope. It had some print on it. That's okay. Just going to be sure that any tape is missing. The adhesive part is probably okay. We'll just give it a try. If it doesn't grind up, then we'll just kind of fish it out. And throw those orange chunks in there, and I think I'll use this packaging, kind of pink packaging from Energy Bars. So there it is. Got the fibers in the blender. Now I'm going to pour water into my blender, and I'm going to pour it so that it's just about a third of the way full. I don't want it full because the fibers will just swirl around at the top and they won't get ground up. But if they're down there at the bottom, they'll get ground up beautifully. So the lid goes on, and that's important. You want the paper on, you want to make paper, but you don't want paper on the ceiling of your kitchen. So then any button. Now I will say families, little kids at festivals, every time I do this, Kids love to push the blender button. It's lots of fun. So you can grind it as long as you like. If you grind it a long time, you'll end up with a very smooth piece of paper. If you grind it a short time, you'll end up with kind of a chunky piece of paper, and both have their charms. So I am going to move my camera down here so you can see the shape. Got the screen, the shape, the water collection bucket. Now I'm going to pour in some pulp. Okay. And this is something you'll just kind of get the idea of once you try it, you'll really get the idea of how much pulp. I guess I poured it halfway full, but definitely experimenting will give you a super idea. So the water has drained into the bucket here. It's still draining. And I'm going to lift my shape off. And now you can see we have a mat of wet fibers. And if you look closely at this, you can get out your magnifying glass and look closely, and you'll see the little fibers. There's little flecks of that beautiful wrapping paper we put in there. I didn't grind it very long, so it's kind of chunky. Oh, yum. I'm just letting that water drain out. It's draining into the bucket there. And paper recycling is great because it saves fibers, so it saves trees, but mostly it saves water. All of this water that we collect in here will be used again to make a next sheet of paper. It doesn't have to be cleaned to do that. We can just use it again and again to make more paper. And that's wonderful. That saves our fresh water for drinking and salmon. So now I'm going to, if I tried to pick up this piece of paper, it's not really going to work because the mat of wet fibers is very loose. So what we have to do now is apply some pressure. I'm going to do that by putting another screen on top that protects our mat of wet fibers. I'm just going to press. Pressing out the water with my hands. And I'm not scrubbing, I'm just pressing. Okay. Now it's still pretty wet. Okay. I'm going to bring that down to my table so that I can apply pressure. Got my sponge is wet, and I wrung it out. I've got just a bin here. I'm gonna squeeze the water out of my sponge and put my sponge on top of the paper, and I'm gonna press hard. Pressing with all my might. If you're, you can stand to do this, put all your weight on it, and then let up, and the sponge will suck the water up. There it is, it's sucking the water out. Now, I do not want to press it down again before I wring it out. First, I'll wring it out because I don't want to put the same water back in. So I'm squeezing out my sponge. Now I'm going to put it down again, and I'm going to press really hard. And the sponge is soaking up the water, and away it goes back into my next batch of pulp here. And then I'm going to press, and the sponge does its job, and again I squeeze out the excess water. So I'm going to do that again and again, and I'm going to show you the paper here. It's still pretty fragile, so I could do a lot more pressing and squeezing. It's starting to come off of the screen though, so that's kind of exciting, but it's very fragile. You can feel if I tried to rip that off there, it would just tear. So what I'm going to do here is wipe my work surface so that it's a little bit drier. Got my paper shape down there. Now I'm going to put this dry sheet on top of it, and I'm going to press on there. Pat, 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 pat. Lift it up, and my goal is to get it off the screen. Oh, there we go. So here's my paper. and it's come off the screen. It's on this sheet, and now it's ready to just set aside and dry. I usually just let them dry overnight, and it is possible to iron them, but it will change it doesn't smell very good. It wrecks your iron, and so I usually just go for the drying overnight part. Tomorrow it will peel right off the screen, but if I'm gentle here, I can show it to you. You can see there's speckles in there from the wrapping paper. We've got some nice chunks. I think that might be a piece of tape. So I would try to peel that out and patch that up. It makes a hole. Oh, yeah, it is. It's part of my filled out section. There we go. Here's the other side. And I'm ready to set that aside for drying. Okay. Let's try another one here. So I've got my water reservoir. And I've got my screen. And I've got a shape over here. I think we'll try a star. Now I mixed up some pulp previously. So I've got some nice orange here. Gonna pour my pulp in there and make this a little thicker this time. And I'm just gently kind of pressing it around so that it fills up the corner of my star shape. And just like the rain pitter-patting on the roof, I'm hearing the water go down into the bucket. I want it to drain, 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 drain. You can see that mat of loose fibers there. Here's something that's also pretty fun. I have some red pulp. This red pulp is, I made it from this great wrapping paper with sparkles in it, and some tissue paper. So I'm just gonna grab a little pulp with my fingers, and I'm gonna drop it on my orange star while I'm waiting for that water to drain out. Yeah, I'm just dropping it on there. You could put it around the edge if you wanted. Whatever you like, it's your piece of paper. What I love about this craft is every sheet of paper comes out differently. Okay. Still very fragile, you know, can't pick it up. So I'm gonna lift the shape off, and we can see some of the paper fibers escaped outside the shape. So I'm just gonna scoop those up there. And now I'm gonna put my screen on. This protects the fibers. And I'm gonna press. I'm pressing the water out. It is draining. Now people ask me, do you use dyes? Do you, do you add paint to it to get the color? No, the color comes free with the with the junk mail, with the wrapping paper, with whatever you're choosing to grind up. You get free color along with that. So that's kind of what it looks like right now. I'm gonna press. Now I'm gonna move this sandwich, my screen sandwich, down there to my table surface. And I'm gonna sponge, press, and squeeze out the water. Ooh, look at that water. Press. Squeeze out the water. And press. Slurp. squeeze out the water, press, squeeze out the water, press, squeeze out the water, press, squeeze out the water. Just going to do that on every part of it. Okay. So I'll show you what it looks like right now. You can see it's this shape is not it's got a beautiful deckled edge to it. That's what that uneven edge is called. If you want it sharper, you can just kind of clean it up a little bit. If you want your shape to be crisper, later on you can cut it. Okay, so that's where we are there. And it doesn't, well, this actually is, I'm kind of bending the screen and it's peeling off. So it's still pretty wet. I mean, this is pretty fragile still, but I can hold it. By the time it dries, I won't be able to tug on it and break it. But this is ready for drying. I can set it over here with the heart that we made. We have two pieces of paper that are pretty glittery here and nice. You can see on the one side it's solid orange and it's got kind of the gold speckles in it. And on the other side, it's got that wrapping paper in it. And so it's got lots more speckles. So there's our second paper shape. People ask me, is there glue? How do you get the paper fibers to hold together? Do you use glue in there? And no, the paper is made of fibers, as we've been talking about, and those, they float around in the water, and then when we press them together, they cling to each other. So they form a very tight bond, clinging to each other. So that brings me to paper can be recycled, an average of 7 times. And every time you run it through the blender and make a new sheet of paper out of it, the fibers get shorter and shorter. So there's very high quality paper that's made from cotton rags. And then there's utilitarian low quality paper such as egg cartons that is made from the very short fibers, or toilet paper. That's another, or paper towels. Those are lower quality. So things you could grind this up to make egg carton paper if you wanted to, but it doesn't have a great color to it. The fibers are very short. The paper that you would get from it just wouldn't be very high quality. So here's something I wouldn't bother with. Here's another thing I wouldn't bother with, and that's a coffee cup that is used. I wouldn't use used food just for health reasons. But another reason is a lot of these cups have plastic on the inside. So if there was part of it that you liked, say there was a wonderful design on it, you could kind of peel it apart and then tear off the design and then get the gold or whatever it is that you loved about it and just discard the rest. Here's something that is made of fibers but is not worth making paper out of, and that's dryer lint. The fibers are super short. They don't cling together. Seems like we always want to do something with dryer lint, but we can't figure out what. I know people do make art with it, but that is something that would require glue. Doesn't make good paper. So there's a not to bother with. Something else, okay, it's got great silver on it, so that's kind of appealing, but it's thick and it has lots of backing paper to it. So I wouldn't bother with a soda pop carton or a cardboard box. Paper bags are wonderful, but what you'll get from this is paper that looks exactly like a paper bag, and it's very hard to dilute that by adding enough color. So this is another thing that I just wouldn't bother making paper out of, because there's so much that just arrives in the mail for free. So let's make another sheet of paper. I'm gonna move this down here. Set my screen down. There's the lower screen. Got a water reservoir here. And I'm going to take, look, it's my shape that I made from the orange juice carton. We'll just set that down there and give that a try. And let's see. I'm going to pour in some pulp that I mixed before. And I love this red glittery stuff. That's really awesome. You can hear that water draining. And here's some green pulp that I made the other day. And toss that in there. And you know, gets on my hands, it's wet, it doesn't stain. Definitely not like working with paint. If you did spill the pulp, it's just a quick wipe up. So I'm letting that, and I'm gonna try just, here's my blender pulp, and just try pouring a whole layer on over that. And I'm gonna make this one very thick, just so we'll see what a thick piece looks like. You can choose thin or thick. If it's actually too thin, it won't hold together. If it's too thick, it's kind of clunky, but it's whatever you decide. So I'm hearing that water drain out. Okay, I'm gonna, still draining. Look at all that water we saved. That can be poured right back into the blender. We don't have to use drinking water.
Hey, Liz.
Got a little color to it. What's that?
Well, you're waiting for that to drain. Maybe you could
Yes.
address just a couple of questions.
Sure.
How long do you keep the pulp water, and should you keep it in the fridge?
Oh, I see. I would just use it as you're making, if you're doing a paper making session, just keep using it. So what I would do is I would, here's my thing, it's draining. I would just, when I'm ready to make another sheet of paper, just pour it back in the blender and then add my new scraps and then blend it back up again. I wouldn't bother keeping it beyond one session. And I suppose you would have to fridge it if you wanted to keep it beyond one session, but it's so beautiful color. Keeping it in the fridge, I don't know, somebody might think it's edible. So what I would do instead, the end of your paper making session, is take the paper water and any excess pulp that you have and pour it down the toilet. That way it won't get in your pipes and cause any clogs, because it does have little fibers in it.
And Liz, one last question we've gotten in chat that you may address later about adding flowers.
Oh, yes. Yes. Let me do that to this one. We've got, I'll lift my shape up. And so there's my pulp. And I've got, you can definitely add extras. So here's some flowers, some dried flowers. So I can just kind of sprinkle those on. If you put them in the blender, it will grind them up. So I wouldn't add them to the blender. If you want to add flowers, then press them in at the end. And sometimes people will add seeds. And since you're adding seeds to this wet mat of fibers, you know, I don't know if they would start to germinate. I've seen paper with seeds in it. I've seen people sell that at card places, things like that. So that's something to experiment with. So I'm pressing my water out. Lots of water in this. And I'm going to move this to my table. sponging, press, ring, press, ring, press, ring, press, ring, press, ring. Getting the upper arm workout here. Okay. Okay. So here's our little experiment with the dried flowers on it. And I might want to do more sponging just to make it drier. It's still pretty wet, but it is coming off the screen. If I was having troubles getting it off the screen, what I would do is take my sheet square and pat it, turn it over, and then it comes right off. And then this is ready to dry. And here's the flowers on there. Okay. So there they are. And I've got some examples that I did the other day. I added those same purple flowers to this star. And so you can see the purple flowers are purple in the wet paper. Once they dried, I didn't do anything, I didn't iron this or anything like that. It just dried naturally overnight, but they have turned less purple. So, you know, these purple flowers look great on the wet paper. They change on the dry paper. That might not be true of all the flowers that you try, but it's a trial and error kind of experiment with different things. After a while, you'll get used to things that you love to grind up to make paper, like holographic wrapping paper is one of my favorites. And then another thing I love to grind up is perfume ads from magazines because it smells fantastic. Or tea bag wrappers, that's one. As long as they're the paper kind and not really the foil kind, you get a beautiful added scent to that. Okay, let's see. I've got some more examples here. Here's one I made that is from candy wrappers. It's sweet tart wrappers. So you can see I chose to make it chunky so that you could see the sweet tarts. A lot of candy comes wrapped in plastic, so that wouldn't work because there's no fibers to it. But this has a kind of a waxy coating to it, but it's got enough fibers so that it made paper. There's my sweet tart paper. Here's paper that has, I used scrap paper and an old photograph. So you can kind of see the parts of the photograph in there. That was an experiment. Certain kinds of paper, I don't know if I would still use photographs in handmade paper making because the surface is kind of slick. Something you wouldn't want to use is, say, carbon paper or the checks that have if you're still using checks, the checks that have the sheet behind them. I wouldn't grind those up. Here's a magazine page. It's pretty nice for just an old magazine page. And you can see letters in there too. Here's a chunkier piece. And you can see I added ribbons to it. And with ribbons, if you're going to add ribbons to your sheet of paper, you know, say you just had a birthday party and you got this, cut them up before putting them in the blender. If you just put them in the blender plain, then what you put in is what you'll get out. The blender won't grind the ribbons. Instead, it will just kind of wind them around the base of the blender. And so you'll end up having to take your blender apart or cut it off the blade in there, which is totally doable. But ribbons can be beautiful in paper. They just need to be cut up ahead of time. This one has threads in it. I've also taken tiny fabric squares, scraps, just fabric scraps, tiny pieces, and kind of torn them up and added them to paper. That makes a nice texture and nice colors. Here's one with junk mail and then a foil-backed candy wrapper. You can see the gold flecks in there, and the fibers of the junk mail hold the gold flecks of the candy wrapper together. And then here's some paper from nature. This is a paper wasp nest, and you never pick one of these up. Show your parents, just don't pick them up on your own. But paper wasps take wood fiber, they chew it up, they spit it out, and they make their own handmade paper. So it's safe to have an empty one, but you want to be sure that none of those cavities are filled with paper wasps because they're pretty mean. Anyway, there it is, paper made by bees, by wasps. All right. I'll just make one more sheet of paper, and then I can answer questions while things drain. We poured our water in here from our reservoir. I added some scraps. And what else do we have here? Oh, there's a tea bag. We'll just add this tea bag wrapper. For that matter, you could add something like tea, and it would add a nice scent to it and some texture. I don't know if it would eventually decompose or not, but definitely it would add, you could make Earl Grey paper. All right. Blending. Make another star here. So I blended it. I've got my screen down there. I've got my shape on top. My reservoir is ready to catch the water. And I'm just going to pour some in there.
So Liz, can I ask some questions as you're
Yes.
draining?
Yes.
Just clarifying about the pulp, because we noted that you added some layers, different colored layers of pulp. And so just clarifying, you would recommend you only work with a pulp the day that you're making the paper. It's nothing you'd save.
I have saved pulp, say if I make something that's really amazing and I think, wow, those colors are just great. What I do is I try to drain out the water with just a strainer, and then I'll put it in a bag and I throw it in the freezer. And then you can thaw that later. But with, say, the water that you're collecting in here, I would reuse the water just that day. It's fantastic that recycling paper saves water, and it really shines on an industrial level. That's when thousands and millions of gallons of water are saved. For home use, it's a great demonstration that's the joy. One of the joys of making paper is it saves water. But I wouldn't bother saving the water. If you have leftover pulp and you don't want to keep it, you can drain the water out, throw it in the trash, or pour the whole thing down the toilet.
Somebody mentioned Somebody mentioned they were a little worried about putting that down the toilet. Have you heard of any plumbing issues with that?
I wouldn't put it down the sink. When I do festivals, when I've done festivals, you know, hundreds of kids a day for Kent Kids Arts Day, we would have lots of extra pulp. And we would just cart it to the bathroom and put it down the toilet, you know, being sure to continue flushing. Okay. Or you can drain out the water and put it in the trash, or you could put it in recycling or your yard waste for that matter. It would be okay in yard waste.
Okay. I'll let you finish up your demo and then we'll do some Q&A after that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so here's my orange star. And then I'm going to put my screen on top of it, protect the screen, and pressing out the water. Now I'm ready for the sponge. Press and squeeze out the extra water. Press, squeeze out the extra water. Press, squeeze, press, squeeze. Okay. So here's something that is unusual. This whole process of after you take the screens off and press it onto the sheet, it's called couching. Spelled like couch, C-O-U-C-H, but it's pronounced couching. And so something fun you can do is take two pieces of paper that are still wet, and I'm going to lay down this a stick. This is on the other end of my dried flowers, but it's a stick. Any twig would do it. I'm going to put that on top of my wet paper, and I'm going to take my other wet paper shape, which is also a star, and I'm going to couch them together. So you can take sheets of paper, layers of paper, press them together. The fibers are still wet enough so that they will stick. They will stick and bond. No glue needed. Press and let the water get soaked up, wring it out. You really want a lot of pressure on this. Press. So by couching the sheets on both sides of this twig, the fun project, you can make your own magic wand or bouquet of flowers. Who knows what things you can do with it. You can add a ribbon loop in there and make an ornament. Lots of fun. I'm sure you're going to have all kinds of wonderful ideas. So here's my last sheet of paper, and then the one I made earlier, and they're couched together around this stick. So I have a magic wand. Okay, ready for some questions.
Okay, I've got a lot of questions. Okay,
oh good.
Can you add paint to your mix?
You could. Then you would have paint to clean up. And what you get from the recycled flyers is free color. So I suppose you could if you wanted to, maybe watercolors or something like that. But I just go with whatever the paper gives me.
Question, can you use a magic bullet if you do not have a blender? Have you ever used one of those little?
I think you could. Yeah, you could make a magic bullet or a baby food thing. You would just be smaller batches, but that would be okay. And it depends what kind of paper if you're going to use it for food afterwards, then be sure you really thoroughly clean it with soap and water. And in a case like that, I wouldn't use paint.
Okay. How long should you wait for it to dry out completely?
A day or two, usually overnight we'll do it.
Yep. And the sun, if you're able to set it in the sun, it might go a little faster, but on a rainy day like this, indoors, a day or two. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you add essential oils?
Oh, you could. That could be really nice. Yeah, just a tiny drop of it. That would be beautiful.
What type of system or setup would you recommend for making a whole 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper?
Ah, okay. There's several different kinds. There's a bunch of different methods for making paper. This one's called the pour method because P-O-U-R, because I poured pulp into a shape and let it drain. For making larger sheets of paper, there are things called dip molds. And you make a giant vat of paper, and then you dip the mold in and pull it straight up, and then the water drains out. So that's called the dip method. And that's probably, I would love to do some videos in the future of using dip molds. It's a different way to do the same thing. You've still got the water, the fibers, the pressure, just a different method.
And when the paper's dry, is it bendable? Can you bend it, fold it without it breaking?
Yeah, it's pretty bendable. Here's a piece that I made the other day. And if I crease it, you're gonna have a crease mark, but it's pretty bendable, depending on how thick you make it. You can also write on it. You can especially write on it with a pencil. If you write on it with a marker, it will tend to bleed because the fibers are kind of loose. But ballpoint pen or pencil works great. And if you don't mind the bleeding, then markers work fine too. The other thing you can do is paint on it with a dry brush watercolor or acrylic. You could paint on it with acrylic or oil.
Pretty. Let's see, we have a question. Can you help us understand how you assemble pieces of paper together to form a flower, for example? Do you use glue or a double-sided tape?
Oh, for this one, I just cooched them. First I made this star and I set it aside on my sheet, ready to dry. Okay, and then so these fibers are still wet. They're still very wet. And then I took my second shape. So here I've got it with the heart, and I put the stick in between it, and I put this other one on top of it, and too bad the colors are wrong here. I'm using the same colors. I'll use this side. So here's got my, I'll just cooch it onto this. So I've got my orange star, and it's wet fibers still. And I'm going to take this heart that's still wet, and I'm just going to put it on top of there. I'll put my paper screen on top of it just to protect it. And then I will use the pressure. I'll use that sponge, and I'm going to press, 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 and there it is. There it is. That's not going to come apart. It's 3 sheets of paper pressed together, and the fibers are all just really clinging together because we pressed them together.
And you think that after people's paper dries and they're interested in making like maybe nice crafts, flowers, folding them a little bit, they can use whatever you would use for normal paper, like glue. You could glue.
Oh yeah, you can glue it. You can double-side tape, staple it. You could sew through it. That's pretty fun. Mm-hmm. These make fantastic cards. They, if you take a little loop of ribbon and put it between your 2 layers like this, or when you've got your mat of wet fibers, just tuck a little loop of ribbon in there. Then you'd be able to hang up your paper shape. If you take a long piece of ribbon and cooched, you know, the shape, and then another shape, and then another shape, you could have a long garland. That could be lots of fun. Once you start, you won't be able to stop.
And a question, can you apply half-dried shapes over a plastic bowl so they dry in that shape?
Yes, that's a great idea. Yes, that is really fun. They would dry in that shape.
And they made a suggestion, maybe you could put a glue over it to preserve that shape long term?
It would, yeah, it would stay in the shape. If you wanted to protect the surface, you could put glue on it, or Mod Podge or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you, oh, I think you just recommended what type of glue you would use to seal it.
Well, you know, Elmer's white glue, that would work, or, you know, any brand white glue. Mod Podge is basically white glue. You can paint that over. That'll make either a shiny or a matte surface that protects the shape, the paper shape.
Excellent. And if you don't have a screen, is there anything else you could use?
Yeah, so the screens, it's just hardware screen. And you can actually order paper making screens that are very fine, but I wanted people to be able to find it from around their house. You could try nylon net. That could work. Some people have those bath scrubbers that are basically nylon net. If you clip the tie on that, I've got one across the room, I just can't go get it because I'm surrounded by paper making equipment. But if you clip the tie on that and got a, you know, long piece of the net, that would work. You know, say you've got a kid's butterfly catching kit and you don't want to use it anymore, that would work as a screen. All kinds of things, anything that will protect the mat of wet fibers, because if we put a sponge on top of it, that wet fiber, that would just destroy it. So we have to have something that will allow the water to drain out and then protect the mat of wet fibers as we apply that pressure so it'll stick together.
Great. And a question, can you write on it with colored pencils? I think you said that. You can color
Yes.
on it, watercolor.
Great. Yeah, colored pencils are great because they don't bleed. Yeah. Very fun. So in that case, I mean, you might even want to just make nice quality white paper or off-white, or use the brown paper bag. In that case, might work really nicely.
And the final question I see, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in chat. But the last one would be examples of different molds people could use at home.
Oh, sure. Let's see. Well, there's cookie cutters are very handy. And then, well, you know, once you get started on this, your ideas will be fueled. But you could, are we talking three-dimensional molds or shape molds?
Both.
Maybe both. So there are ceramic cookie molds. Maybe people have seen them. You press the cookie dough into the ceramic mold, and those are fantastic for making paper shapes. Because the ceramic part of it sucks the water out. In that case, you would drain the pulp, you would put it in the mold, and then you would let it sit probably for several days. And then when you can get it out, then it will be the exact mold of that. So you could also use ceramic red clay pottery that's unglazed. That would also soak it out if you're making a shape. Any plastic cup, you could, you know, say you could mold it over this if you wanted to, or, you know, a more attractive cup, plastic cup, those would work as well. I've seen plastic or ceramic plates that have say the design of a fish on them. That'd be a great thing to mold into paper. Once you've got that pulp, you can really kind of press it into anything. Just press and drain the water out.
Okay, and let's see, one more just came in. Is there a general proportion of paper fibers with cloth fiber or paper with plant fiber successfully create paper?
Yeah, cloth is, well, the big mills make paper from cloth. In fact, Levi Strauss, the jeans maker, makes paper out of their jeans scraps. That's 100% cotton fiber paper, and it's beautiful. I mean, I wrote them a letter just so they would write me back. I don't have it right handy, but it's a beautiful sheet of paper made from Levi's jeans. So yes, you can make fiber, you can make paper from cotton fibers, not dryer lint because there's too much not cotton in there. You need a big blender to do it. This kind of blender won't work for that. These home blenders are fantastic for recycling fibers from junk mail and flyers and things like that. But the big and plant fibers need to be cooked before they can be made into paper. So when people are making, when the big mills are making paper from trees, they actually, or any of the other fibers that they use, they actually have to cook that before it will be ready, before it's just wood chips. It's wood chips until they cook it and break the fibers down. All kinds of great books at the library on paper making and paper recycling.
Yes, yeah, we tried to find some downloadable books, but unfortunately not so many downloadable books on paper making, but we do have quite a few when our libraries are reopen again.
Yes.
So look forward to that.
Yeah. And
Liz,
then on my website, I do have exact step-by-steps. I did this a few years ago at Maker Faire at EMP in Seattle. And so I just made a post that has exact steps. So if you want exact steps on what we did today, it's there all lined out.
Oh, thanks.
And
Megan.
that's lizgasper.com.
Yep, Megan just posted that in chat.
Awesome,
And,
thank you.
Let's see. I am going to, folks, I think that we are wrapping up now. I think this has been a fantastic program with Liz Gasper, and I do have her website as well as Newcastle Arts Council's website here on our closing screen. I want to thank you all so much for attending today. Liz, that was an amazing demonstration. You made it very clear, and I was really surprised how easy it can be at home to make your own paper with a little patience.
That's great. Thank you everyone for coming. This is a really fun thing to do. I just loved it.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you to Newcastle Arts Council. Thank you to City of Newcastle and For Culture for funding this program. And of course, thank you to Liz for providing these excellent instructions. We have recorded this program, and so look for it on either Liz's page or Newcastle Arts Council's page. In the next week or two, we'll probably get it uploaded for you to view. And until next time, everyone, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and see you later. Bye-bye.